Hey there, Social Studies 30-1 here, taking a look at source number two, our theme of the week, of course, citizenship, protest, and so on. So I'll give you a few seconds to examine the photo, and then we'll take it apart. Okay, so photograph. We've done a few photographs. Photographs can be a little on the tough side because you're not getting a bias or a perspective. You're just getting someone capturing a moment in time. So what you need to do is you're going to point out specific imagery, things from the photograph, try and explain them, maybe expand on the caption at the bottom. And then you're going to have to look at it from a variety of angles to establish perspective. So first of all, when I first saw the photograph, and I thought it was important for us to do um, uh, for George uh, photograph. What do you call it? Source. Sorry. I thought we had to do one just because it's in the news. It fits perfectly with where we are in the course. And so when I first saw this, what struck me, and I don't know why, it was just on one hand, you have the person taking a knee in non-violent, stance, stature. And then, just on the other side, you see the police standing at the ready, nightsticks in hand. And if you look closely, you can see that this guy's actually got um, what would be a tear gas launcher, and other guys are carrying the nightsticks. They're wearing their riot gear. So these are not just, I mean, they might be regular policemen. They're not dressed and ready to do the job of a regular policeman at this moment. If you look in the background, you can actually see as well, it looks like they've already used canisters of tear gas. Tear gas is a way that you disperse a crowd. Tear gas does what it sounds like it would do. It makes you cry. It decapacitates you, incapacitates you. It might blind you. It affects your ability to breathe. You lose track of your senses and where you are. It's how you disperse a crowd without resorting to using the nightsticks and the billy clubs and fists and guns and so on. And so what struck me when I first saw the photograph was how on one hand you have someone, in non-violent stance taking a knee, and on the other side you have guys at the ready. And it just made me think, why are they at the ready? Like why do they think they need to do that? I mean, after all, these people on the left really are just kneeling there. Some of them even have their hands up in the air, as a form of, I don't mean any harm. I'm almost surrendering. And if you look really close too, you can see this guy's actually recording it with a video camera. And that's important too. And so things you're going to want to point out, just the stance that the nonviolent protesters have taken, and how it is nonviolent, and how it would look really bad on TV if these policemen were to act and use the tear gas and use the nightstick, which it looks like they kind of already have used the tear gas, and how much that would be helpful to the cause of the non-violent protesters that are protesting Black Lives Matter in light of recent events in the States, and how bad that would look on TV. If a viewer tuned in and all they saw was policemen, attacking or violently, forcefully dispersing the crowd of nonviolent protest, that would give a lot of sympathy to the protesters in the Black Lives Matter movement. And it would also, serve to vilify law enforcement authorities because it looks like they're being overly aggressive. I mean, when you think about it, these people don't seem to be doing anything wrong. Um, and if they acted and used violence or force to break apart the protest, the police and the government, let's be honest, the government would have been, the body that sent these policemen in the first place. They would lose a lot of sympathy in the eyes of the public. And that's all protest is really trying to do. The physical act of protest is trying to change government policy. Usually, nonviolent protest is about protesting government illiberalist policies. And so you would talk about, the death that occurred in the States a couple of weeks before this photo. You would establish that. You would talk about that and how that was captured on tape. Um, how the police killed him over several minutes, how there were several policemen involved in that act. You would talk about all that from, a recent historical standpoint, and you're going to link it to this source, through obvious means. I'm not sure what else you would point out in terms of uh, imagery in the source. I don't think there's much else that you can point out. The caption helps you establish context. So, you see that it's part of the Black Lives Matter protest movement. You see the date, and you know exactly what event this source would be referring to. So that's probably as far as I would take my imagery interpretation, symbol interpretation of the source. If we go to our connections, what's going on? And usually in any protest where they're protesting illiberalist measures by the government, what those protesters are doing is, in their view, in their eyes, the government has put itself above the rule of law. And that's what they're protesting. The government put itself above the rule of law by doing, whatever action, murder, whatever it might be. And what they're doing is they're protesting the lack of individual rights and freedoms for individual people, or at the very least, a marginalized group of people in society. So, in the eyes of these protesters, uh, Black people have been marginalized both politically and economically in the States. They've been the victims of police brutality, and there's evidence that would suggest that. And so, what the protesters would be doing is they're protesting for greater rights and freedoms for people they think have been marginalized in the United States, present and past. And you might talk about further examples of that too. But for sure, you're going to link it to rule of law and individual rights and freedoms. In terms of perspective, again, photographs are tough because you're not going to get necessarily a bias. You're not going to get satire, irony, anything like that. A photograph can't really convey that. But, you would examine it first of all from the perspective of the protester. Those protesters, the ones taking the knee, are challenging liberalism. They're pointing out the hypocrisy behind liberalism, and that under liberalism, everyone should be held accountable to the rule of law, even police officers. Everyone should get the same degree of rights and freedoms. And in the eyes of the protesters, not everyone is. Some have been marginalized and don't get the same degree of rights and freedoms in the state. So they'd be challenging, they'd be critiquing liberalism. The other perspective you might examine would be, that of the police officers. What's going through their minds as they watch this unfold. Um, well, probably they feel threatened. They're probably worried. They're concerned. I mean, you know what happened in the States over the last couple of weeks. You know that some of these protests have percolated into acts of violence on both sides. Police have become violent at times, the protesters have become violent at times, and that has to be in their minds as they face down this crowd of, oh, I wouldn't call them angry protesters, but at the very least protesters at this point. So you would talk about their perspective and what they might think about that. Um, I'm not sure where I would go with that. They may sympathize with the protesters themselves, but they've also got a job to do, and so probably in their mind, they're protecting liberalism, and in the minds of the police by quelling this protest, if it comes to that. In their minds, they're probably protecting and embracing liberalism. They're probably worried about it being lost or being taken away in the midst of what they could be calling anarchy. And certainly, if this scene becomes widespread and bigger, that could lead to a state of anarchy or political chaos in the state. So in their minds, they're probably saving liberalism, they're protecting liberalism. Finally, other perspectives you might look at, what would a TV audience or a newspaper audience think? What's going through their minds? And for sure, what would the government's perspective be? If the government, after all, was the agency that sent the police force in the first place, what would the American government be thinking? Again, they're probably thinking they're saving liberalism, they're protecting liberalism by doing this because they're avoiding political disorder and maybe even political chaos. That's probably as far as I would take the perspectives. Photographs can be tough to do just because there are a variety of perspectives that you need to examine. and you've got to examine all of them. Okay, I think you did a really good job with that. I'm assuming that you did. Geez, that was the second last source. We'll do one more tomorrow. Thanks for listening.